I want to motivate this topic of consumer surplus by asking you the following question. When was the last time you paid the absolute maximum you were willing to pay for anything? That is, the supplier of the good or the service squeezed the very last dollar out of you. I can't think of a single purchase that I've ever made, good or service, where I've paid the absolute maximum I was willing to pay. So let's motivate this concept of consumer surplus by considering the following demand curve. The supply curve is not really relevant in this diagram. I've just drawn it in to give me an equilibrium price. So let's assume you like pizza and the price of pizza is $10, and in a given week you eat 5 pizzas. And you eat pizzas Monday through to Friday and take the weekend off from all the fat and cholesterol. For the first pizza, the question then is, what would be the maximum amount of money you would be willing to pay for that pizza? Now, this is a hypothetical question. You don't have to pay this amount, but what would be the amount you'd be willing to pay? You actually pay $10 for this first pizza, but the way I've drawn it, you'd be willing to pay $18. So $18 is a measure of the utility or the enjoyment that you would get from that first pizza. You get $18 worth of enjoyment, but you only have to pay $10. So that difference of $8 between the $18 you'd be willing to pay and the $10 you actually pay is your consumer surplus on the first pizza that you consume on Monday. Now, with the second pizza, your maximum willingness to pay is $16. Why are you willing to pay less? Because the utility that you would get by eating a second pizza in the same week would actually decline. And you'd be willing to pay only $14 for the third pizza, because at this point you're kind of getting a little bit sick of pizza and you're probably craving some variety. So on the first unit we get consumer surplus of 8, on the second unit consumer surplus of 6, on the third unit consumer surplus of 4. So if you add up this triangle here, it's $20. So this triangle, which is below the demand curve and above the price line, that is our area of consumer surplus, and that area is equal to $20. So this consumer surplus of $8 you received on the first unit of output here, that is a measure of the welfare you get by being able to buy something at a cheaper price than what you are actually willing to pay for it. So it's a measure of consumer welfare. The next slide, producer surplus. So rather than consuming pizzas now, you're producing them. I go into your pizza shop and I ask you the following question. For the first pizza, what is the minimum amount of money that I would have to pay you for you to produce that first pizza for me? And your answer is $6. Once again, this is hypothetical. I'm actually going to pay you the $10 price, but we're just going through a bit of a mind exercise here, a mental exercise. So if you're willing to pay me $6, that must reflect to some extent your costs, the costs of producing. But what costs are we talking about? Well, in economics, we assume that that $6 represents your variable production costs, the cost of the pizza base, the ingredients on the top of the pizza and the cheese, as well as electricity and labour and all of those other variable costs. So theoretically, if you could recuperate all of those variable production costs associated with producing that first pizza, and they were equal to $6, and I was willing to give you the $6, then you sort of break even. As you produce the second pizza and the third, your production costs slowly begin to rise. Probably not this rapidly, but you get the idea. So $6 represents the minimum amount you'd be willing to receive from me. That reflects your variable production costs, but I actually pay you the market price of $10 for your pizza. So for the first unit of pizza, you earn producer surplus equal to $4. For the third unit, producer surplus is $3, and we continue on like that. So producer surplus is this area below the $10 price line and above the supply curve. So in this diagram, I've got producer surplus equal to $10. So these two concepts of consumer and producer surplus will be very important later on in this topic when we start intervening in markets. So sometimes governments will do things like put a tax on a market, provide a subsidy to a market, or maybe put a quota on a market. When we have those types of interventions, the concepts of consumer and producer surplus help us understand to what extent those interventions impact consumers and producers. And so that's why we need to understand what consumer and producer surplus is before we go any further.